China's incredible growth over the past few decades owes much to the political class that steered it, reforming the institutions that had eroded under Mao and pursuing market-oriented economic policy. There are signs now, under President Xi Jinping, that another power shift is underway in this emerging superpower. Joining us now for more from the U.S. Capitol, David Shambaugh. He is professor of political science and international affairs at George Washington University and the author of the book China's Future. And Professor Shambaugh, we're delighted to welcome you to TVO tonight. I want to start by saying that for the past 69 years and one day, because the anniversary of the People's Republic is yesterday, 69th anniversary, the last 6 years have been presided over by Xi Jinping, who is now president for life. And I'd like your take on whether you see him as a more progressive or regressive leader in the tradition of Chinese leaders.
Well, I see him certainly as a regressive leader, although, ironically, he's trying to take the country forward, but he's doing it in a very retrogressive, regressive, and repressive, I would argue, way as well. In other words, Xi Jinping, his rule and his tactics of rule harken back, I would argue, to the pre-Cultural Revolution period, the 1950s and 60s, during the Mao era, when his own father was, in fact, in the leadership. Xi Jinping is a highly illiberal leader. There is not a liberal gene in his DNA. And so he's trying to move, the country forward in a number of domains, but certainly not through decentralization, certainly not through liberalization, certainly not through tolerance or enfranchisement of other actors in society. This is a real throwback, kind of Leninist dictator that we have in power in China today.
What shaped him during his formative years that would have resulted in him being the way he is today?
Well, that's a sort of mystery for China watchers. I mean, we do know what happened to him during his youth. I mean, first of all, he was what they call a princeling in China. He's born to his father, as I say, was in the senior leadership in the political bureau under Mao. He was a long marcher. Xi Jinping and his siblings literally grew up in the leadership compound, the Zhongnan High in Beijing, went to the most elite party grammar schools in Beijing. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, you might say, within a communist system until age 14, when the Cultural Revolution broke out in 1966. His father was imprisoned, and Xi and his siblings were sent off to the countryside. That begins a long story. Basically, he spent about 6-7 years in Shanxi province doing manual labor and living amongst the peasantry. So that was a very formative experience for him. He talks about it, he refers back to it. But once he finally, and then he worked his way up through the party apparatus in several provinces, Fujian, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Shanghai. Finally, he got to the senior leadership. But this is a man who believes in the party. In fact, he said to the last party congress last November, "The party shall control all," quote unquote. So he thinks that the party had atrophied. He thinks that China is being buffeted by a lot of illiberal winds inside the country and from outside the country. So his 6 years in power, he's done a lot of things. He's cracked down on corruption. He's cracked down on the military. He's cracked down on intellectuals. He's cracked down on all dissent. He's cracked down on religion, on NGOs, on so-called civil society, on the media. This is the most draconian period China has experienced since the aftermath of the 1989 Tiananmen uprising and the subsequent suppression. Well, so this is a man who's trying to kind of put China's house in order, but he's using extremely illiberal methods to do so.
Let me pluck one of the things off that list you just gave, and that was his attempts to root out political corruption. I want to know from you whether you think that is a genuine attempt to reduce corruption in the country, or is it more an attempt to put his political adversaries behind bars?
It's both, Steve. Certainly, China is rampant with corruption, or was when he took over. In fact, it's a long-standing problem his predecessors, both Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, when they got into office, how did they begin their terms? With crackdowns on corruption. But they were pretty short-lived. They lasted 6-8 months. Xi Jinping's is still ongoing, 6 years. Over 1 million party cadres have been taken down in this anti-corruption purge. 4,000 military officers and 120 generals in the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, have been taken down. And indeed, many of them are corrupt. Some of the stories that have been published with their prosecutions are really salacious, in terms of embezzlement and money and lifestyles and mansions and so on and so forth. So, yes, genuine corruption. But like all Chinese communist campaigns like this, it's being used to target political adversaries of Xi as well.
Many authoritarian regimes are focused around a cult of personality. Is his based on genuine popularity throughout the country, though?
Well, first of all, on the issue of cult of personality, that's something China certainly experienced during the Mao era. When Deng Xiaoping succeeded Mao, he explicitly said, we will never have another cult of personality, including himself. That was, in Deng's mind, one of the reasons China had really gone off the path during the Mao period. So, long story short, the Communist Party has intentionally tried to circumscribe personality cults for their leaders since 1978. So, along comes Xi Jinping. What do we have? A major personality cult, just like, or maybe, well, not quite as much as Mao. Hadn't gotten to that level yet, but it's extreme. Is he popular, though, you ask? Is it a genuine personality cult? Well, it's contrived. The propaganda apparatus in China is in overdrive when it comes to Xi Jinping. But he is a genuinely popular figure from what we can tell. And with different sectors of the public, and particularly the rural sector. So there's a kind of combination of the two. It's an artificially manufactured personality cult, but he's not an aloof, well, he is an aloof figure, actually. He's a very kind of imperial, ruling in an imperial way, and I would argue almost like a mafia don. But he does have genuine popularity from what we can tell.
Why do you think he is trying to overturn many of the reforms that Deng Xiaoping brought in 40 years ago now?
Well, he's trying to overturn some of the political reforms Deng Xiaoping brought in, and actually he's trying to overturn some of the economic reforms. So let me just try and give you a quick snapshot of each. On the economic side, Deng's genius was really in decentralization and letting the Chinese people really explore their own entrepreneurial abilities. And it just drove the country's economic boom for the last 3 plus almost now 4 decades. In fact, it'll be 4 decades in December. So it's all about deconstructing the state, getting the state and the Communist Party out of economic decision-making. That's basically that plus foreign investment coming into the country and exports to developed countries. That's sort of been the secret sauce of the economic boom in the last 4 decades. Xi Jinping comes along and says, no, we want to strengthen the state. In fact, when he took over, the state's role in the economy was about 18% of GDP. It's now back up to 45%. Xi Jinping really believes in a very strong party state in all respects. So the state has had its sort of reassertion and vengeance on the economic side. On the political side, absolutely. He is just trying to, well, he's afraid the Communist Party of China has potential to go the way the Communist Party of the Soviet Union did. He gave a speech right after he came to power in 2012 in Guangdong, and he said, if we don't get a grip on our party, we're going to wind up the same way. So the last 6 years has all been about strengthening the party politically and its controls. I mean, Xi Jinping is a control freak, and he controls bureaucracies, the propaganda apparatus, the internal security apparatus, and other bureaucracies that have, as I say, instituted this very repressive and regressive kind of security situation on many sectors of the country.
Let me follow up on the economic points that you made in that last answer. I think I've seen estimates that the Chinese economic growth rate is going to decline from, say, 7% to closer to 5% over the next period of time. And while we might be thrilled in Canada or the United States with a growth rate of 5%, I gather that's not the case in China. What are the ramifications of a 5% growth rate there?
Well, economists think that it's already around 5.5%, some economists, and that the figure that the Chinese announce is inflated by 1 to 1.5%. The third quarter figures for China this year just came out yesterday and shows a contraction of the industrial economy, really across the board. The GDP growth rate, which is only one, and I would say a rather crude, simplistic measure of economic development. Yes, it's now coming down certainly under 7, most likely under 6, as you say. Many developed economies would love to have that. That's not the point. For China, the issue is not absolute GDP growth rate, it's structural recalibration of the economy to become a more service-based economy, a more consumption-driven economy, and a more innovation-driven economy. China is now, like many other newly industrialized countries, that we call it, in the middle income trap. Per capita income in China is now almost $10,000. PPP terms slightly more than that. And so China has to try and change the macro economic model for development away from what I described earlier that Deng Xiaoping had started to a much more consumption, innovation, services-driven model. And Xi Jinping, when he came into power in 2013, he unveiled a huge package that basically the World Bank wrote for him to do that. But here we are now, 5 years later, 6 years later, and it's been stillborn. They have done virtually nothing to implement that economic package. So it's kind of like a drug addict who just can't get off of the drug, and Xi Jinping, the drug for him is the state. And, he doesn't want to devolve state intervention in the economy. He wants to increase it. Well, that's not going to help contribute to the services, consumption, innovation driven growth that I just described.
China is understandably, given its recent history, haunted, I guess is the right word to use, haunted by chaos. So I wonder how powerful China feels it needs to be in order to stave off those kinds of fears.
Frankly, personally, I think it's very overblown, this so-called fear of chaos. Luan, they call it in Chinese. Da luan, great chaos. Yes, China's had chaos throughout its history. Last major time, was actually 1989, and that resulted in a military crackdown. Prior to that, it was the Cultural Revolution. This is something the Chinese government constantly tells its own people and the world. If we don't have an iron fist, an iron control on our society, chaos will result. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I think the Chinese people are very capable of living peacefully with each other, the society remaining stable. So it's to me, it's a false excuse for repression.
Broadly speaking, what role do you think China wants to play in the world?
Well, it wants to resume or regain the role as a major global power that it feels it deserves and it once had. And that is indeed what we are witnessing. China is returning to that role, to be sure. And we should welcome that, on balance. And I give Xi Jinping, in fact, pretty good credit on the external side. Internally, as you can tell, I don't have a lot of good things to say about his rule. But internationally, you've got to give him high marks, with the exception of a few countries, the United States included, in fact, probably at the head of the list, followed by Japan, India, and Australia. Those are the 4 countries on the planet with which China has real difficulties in their relations. Everybody else, including in Canada, China has mixed to good relations. So under Xi Jinping's watch, we've really seen the Belt and Road Initiative rolling out. That's still going to take a long time in the future, but it's a really dramatic initiative. We see China having very expansive presence now in Latin America and Africa, across the Middle East and Central Asia and Southeast Asia. So China's resuming and regaining its position as a major international power.
I don't want to assume that everybody knows what the Belt and Road plan is. Could you help us understand that a little better?
Sure. Well, like everything else in China, they have a slogan for it. This is the so-called 21st century maritime Silk Road and the economic belt. One and they both connect China to Europe. And it's a little mixed up because the belt, in fact, goes across Central Asia and Eurasia to Europe. The Maritime Silk Road goes through the South China Sea, across the Indian Ocean, up the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean to Europe. Anyway, this is the largest economic development initiative in the history of the world. $1 to $4 trillion. 1.2 so far, 1.2 trillion has been committed to it. It's an infrastructure. It's a massive infrastructure initiative that the Chinese are going to build. Ports, rail lines, telecommunication lines, electric grids, all kinds of so-called connectivity in 82 countries. 82 countries have signed up for this thing, and they stand to benefit on the face of it. However, we're already seeing many of these countries falling into so-called debt traps, and rather deep debt traps. The terms of the infrastructure is not advantageous to the recipient country, very advantageous to China. So it's a little early. We cannot conclude yet whether this thing is going to be a success or a failure. I think it's going to take about 5 years, and frankly, it'll be a little bit of both. But it dwarfs the Marshall Plan after the Second World War, anything else the world has ever seen.
Now, when you talked a moment ago about China's international ambitions, for those of us who grew up in the Cold War, I need to have a better understanding of whether you think that means China sees itself as a kind of alternate bloc, kind of like the Soviet bloc was, rivaling American power across the world and sort of carving up spheres of influence and all of that. What's your view on that?
No, I don't see them in that way. I don't think that China certainly has an ideology, and that ideology is Marxism-Leninism, just as the Soviet ideology was. China's not into exporting Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics, as they always qualify it. China doesn't really, in fact, it's questionable the degree to which the Chinese people themselves believe in their own nation's ideology. But China is expansionist economically, no doubt about it, and it's increasingly expansionist militarily. And it is pouring over the last decade probably between 10 and 20 billion dollars a year into so-called soft power and public diplomacy and global propaganda efforts. So they think that they want to become a global cultural superpower. That's a term that Xi Jinping himself has used. Because they now understand that image matters. But that's different than saying they want to create a block of other like-minded authoritarian states that will follow them or follow the so-called China model. I myself don't see that. So that is an important distinction between the former Soviet Union and China. China's out for itself. It's a very self-interested country, self-interested power. It doesn't have this sort of missionary complex that other major powers, the former Soviet Union, the United States, others have had. So to answer your question, I don't think, so far, I don't see evidence of that. It may come in time. Some people think that they saw that and heard that in Xi Jinping's speech to the 19th Party Congress last year, but he quickly rolled that back in a subsequent speech. So long story short, so far, I don't see them as an ideologically expansionist power.
Okay, let's finish up on this because you've clearly laid out the case that China has every intention of being a 21st century powerhouse. What do you think we in the West need to know about this country in terms of its people, its culture, its history, its approach to international affairs, in order for us to understand them better and not needlessly add to the predictable tensions that always come in international affairs?
Excellent question, Steve. Off the top of my head, I would say probably three things we in the West need to understand. First is, well, the sense of historical greatness that China has. This is not a new global power. This is actually not the first time China has risen in world affairs. It's the fourth time. So they have a long, proud, civilizational sense of themselves. Secondly, though, they have a very deep insecurity about their role in the world and the staying power of the Chinese Communist Party. And they also went through what they called the century of shame and humiliation prior to 1949. So there's a kind of chip on China's shoulder. It's actually a pretty big chip, and it's a chip that was caused by the West and Japan. And so they're hypersensitive about what they perceive to be Western intrusions into their country, whether it's sovereign intrusions or cultural or ideological or economic intrusions. So that's kind of the second thing, an insecurity. And that manifests itself in kind of overcompensation. Their control complex, I think, is a reflection of that. There's a lot of xenophobia in Chinese society and in the Chinese Communist Party. So that's kind of a second feature. Third one goes back to your previous question, though, about China and does it have an ideology it wants to export. I would say that while I don't see them having an ideology they want to export, they are definitely interfering or in other countries' internal affairs, including in Canada. They are trying to establish a whole range of activities in various countries that basically try to control the narrative about China on a global basis. So they really feel that there's, the West in particular and other countries don't see them objectively. And they try and use various methods, including self-censorship, bullying, intimidation tactics, to try and control the narrative outside of China about China. So we need to realize this is, and maybe the last thing I'll say is, in my view and experience, China is not a militarily aggressive country. They haven't fought a war since 1979. That didn't go very well against Vietnam. They've never occupied another country. They're not in the regime change business. They are certainly building up their military. But, I don't really think there's a precedent so far, doesn't mean a country can't change, to become a kind of militarily expansionist power. So, myself, I'm not all that concerned about it, although the Chinese military, naval modernization in particular, is challenging a number of its neighbors in Asia, is challenging the United States, and is expanding its footprint throughout the Indo-Pacific.
I suspect, Professor, we could do another 10 minutes alone on whether Tibet is or isn't being occupied, but sadly we don't have that time right now, so we're going to have you back on the program in future and deal with that on another occasion. We're grateful you could spare some time for us on TVO tonight. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Nice talking to you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.